Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in History. I'm so glad you could join us. We are going to continue with our unit here on the expansion and growth of the United States. So for my students, you'll want to make sure that you're picking up after the Section 1 notes because we're going to start Section 2 today. Those of you who are along just for the learning, welcome, and I hope that I can continue your understanding of the history of the United States. So the image you guys are looking at is a perfect image for this section because we're going to talk about the development of travel, and in particular, water travel. And the steamboat is going to revolutionize the way people move west. And certainly with the creation of more canal systems and utilizing the water resources, you're going to start to see that movement west is going to skyrocket in this time period. So let's start out here with our learning objectives. So I can explain how transportation routes, such as roads, improved as settlers moved west, and steamboats greatly improved the transport of goods along rivers. So certainly for this one, we're going to look a lot at technology and that movement west. So one of the things I want to highlight is where people are living. So let's start with the first U.S. Census in 1790. And a census is just essentially an official count of a population, and it's typically done once every 10 years. So we're filming right now in the year 2020, and so there's a census going on this year that will mark, again, the most recent census in U.S. history. But the first one was in 1790, and it showed that we had about 4 million people who lived in the United States, and most of them lived east of the Appalachian Mountains. So if we were to kind of draw a line, it's roughly this blue line. Most people are living east of that line in 1790. And that makes sense. We just got out of the Revolutionary War. We hadn't acquired things like the Louisiana Territory yet. But if we fast forward to 1820, we're going to have a different story. So in 1820, the census is actually going to reveal that the population of the United States had grown to 10 million, so it more than doubled in that 30-year time period. And nearly 2 million of them, so about a fifth, so we're talking 20%, had moved west of the Appalachian Mountains, which again was this line here. So we're seeing more and more expansion west, and we're going to see that even skyrocket even more with the creation of some of these new technologies. So one of the things that we see is the development of turnpikes. These are roads that you had to pay to use, and sometimes we might refer to them as like a toll road because you'd have to pay a toll to use them. But the money was used to pay for the road, to maintain it, and then if enough money was gained from a road, to expand the amount of roads and certainly connect them. So that developed a whole new way of transportation and made relocating made it much easier. And so certainly when we're thinking about like your Conestoga wagons, people would have continued to move west on the turnpikes. You also saw the construction on the National Road at the time, which was going to link the western lands to the East Coast. And that began in 1811. And again, that was also going to mark a tradition in the United States of trying to connect areas. And so it's certainly today we would see the interstate system that was created by the Eisenhower administration in the 50s, which hopefully will get there this year. But you're going to certainly see, again, this development of a desire to connect the United States. And so just to kind of illustrate this point by the numbers, you're going to see the development here of 3 states. You got Ohio, Indiana, and Illinois. And certainly as we push further west, we're going to see that the numbers are going to decrease a little bit. But look at just how much growth you see between the year 1800 in Ohio. I mean, we went from about 42,000 to pretty close to about 938,000. So it's a massive increase. And Indiana, you're going to see it again skyrocket to about 343,000, and then you're going to see 157,000 here. From, again, a very small population that we would have seen in 1800. So certainly those connections that are being built and that continued desire to move west for a new opportunity is really going to fuel the growth of some of these new states. And so we've got to think about a little bit about one of the ways that people are moving are by rivers. And so I want to look at some of the advantages and some of the disadvantages of traveling by river during the 1800s. So let's look at advantages first. So barges could certainly carry far more load and more material than a wagon could. And so certainly with industrialization going on, this is going to be important, but also certainly people needing to ship crops west in order, like their cash crops, for example, in order to make them or get them to market. Also, traveling by water tended to be more comfortable than traveling over roads that were poor quality. Some of the disadvantages that we see, though, is that the rivers in this area, particularly like the Northeast and getting into the areas around the Great Lakes, is the rivers don't flow in an ideal direction. Ideally, they would flow east and west in order to connect people living in the west to the markets in the east. But a lot of them flow north and south. And so certainly that would have to be something that people would have to work around. And traveling against the current by barge was extremely difficult. It took a ton of work. Anybody who's ever tried to paddle a boat like a kayak or a canoe up a river knows that that's very difficult, and it's also quite slow. And so certainly what we need is something that could speed up that process. And that's where the steamboat's going to come in. Steamboat's going to be able to go against the current, still going to be able to hold large amounts of, say, people or cargo, and it's going to be a game changer for the United States. So enter Robert Fulton. He's going to develop the steamboat, and it's going to be able to travel up against those long and strong river currents. And it's going to usher in a brand new way, in a brand new age as far as river travel goes. And it's going to revolutionize things. And so one of the things you're going to see for our idea here is how businesses and government officials are going to develop a plan to build a series of canals to link the eastern and western parts of the country at this time. So DeWitt Clinton led a group that developed a plan to link New York City with the Great Lakes, and that region via a canal across the state of New York, which a canal is essentially an artificial waterway and typically connects different bodies of water. So the Erie Canal was what this particular canal was called, due to its location near the lake, of course. The Erie Canal opened up on October 26, 1825, and a series of locks were what provided a way to raise and lower boats as they traveled through different stages of the canals, not unlike you would see, say, in more modern canals like, say, the Panama Canal today. And so that is one of the things that you would account for, that canal system, and changes in elevation as you would make your way through and across these different waterways. And so these separate compartments, each of which the water levels were raised or lowered in order to make your way again across. And so certainly if you were going in spaces where the elevation was decreasing, you could increase the amount of water in those lock systems in order to best provide a passage for a boat to travel through. So you're going to see a canal boom. So what you'll see here between 1820 and 1860 is these large series of canals, which are essentially going to help connect a lot of the western lands at the time to the East Coast. And in particular, this is going to make it much more sustainable for people to live out in the West, grow cash crops like wheat and corn, and ship them to eastern markets where they can make more money. And so you're going to see, again, that's going to help flood the western lands with more people. And also certainly it's going to make it easier, again, for people to move west, where there is, again, a little bit less development as far as your economy or even the areas in which people live. So by 1850, you're going to see the United States is going to have more than 3,600 miles of canals. And so certainly you saw the majority of those in the states of New York and Pennsylvania, but you're going to see increasingly that they're going to be found out west as well. So places like Ohio, Indiana, Illinois are all going to be a part of, and certainly other states are all going to be a part of that canal system. So there's going to be two waves of Western settlement that result from the admission, that resulted in the admission of new states. So the first wave actually started to begin before the 1790s. And so it resulted in the creation of states like Vermont, Kentucky, and certainly Tennessee and Ohio. The second wave occurs certainly after this time period of growth in the West, and canals are going to be a big part of that. And that is between 1816 and 1821. It's going to result in the creation of states like Indiana, Illinois, Mississippi, and certainly Missouri. All right, so as we see that Western settlement occurring, we're going to see that pioneers are going to tend to settle in communities along larger rivers. That makes it so that certainly they could ship their crops more easily. We're also going to see that people are going to prefer to move with others from their home communities. Kind of a way of creating that support system that you need in starting a new way of life. So, for example, Indiana was settled by people mostly from Kentucky and Tennessee. And then you also have a state like Michigan, whose pioneers came mostly from the New England states. And so you're going to see different groups of people, and you'll also see this later in history with immigrant groups. They're tending to want to live in communities with people who are in a similar cultural background to them. And so you're going to see that settlement west happen with groups of people for support systems. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's going to about wrap up our conversation here about that Western settlement, the growth of the West, and again, our unit here on growth, our section here on growth and expansion on the spread of canal systems, as well as a growing Western population. For my students, hopefully you're following along with the guided notes. Ask me any questions that you have. For those of you who are just along for the journey, thank you so much for listening. We really greatly appreciate it here, and thank you. And we'll see you for the next edition of Mr. Merrigan's Moments in History.